Hello and welcome, all you brainiacs out there. It's Dwight. I'm back here with you with The Broken Brain, your weekly dose of mental health, psychology, and culture. I'm kind of workshopping an intro, have been the entire time that I've been doing this podcast. You'll notice it's almost never the same when I come back in. If you're shocked and horrified, I could just put a period after that. Are you shocked and horrified? Most of us are nowadays about something. There's a lot of things going on in the world, but one of the things that's been especially concerning to me is some of the things that are going on in Texas, particularly, but in other states. The governor of Texas recently has been pushing for legislation and for directives and basically trying to make it categorize as child abuse if you are to take care of the medical and even social needs of your children, if they happen to be transgendered. And so that has been very horrifying and very sad to me to read about the way that people talk about this issue and the way that they treat transgendered individuals. Something that I've had the experience of being able to write recommendation letters of giving people the mental health all clear that they're required to get for certain medical treatments and things. So when I receive this in the news, this is just heartbreaking to me. I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about it, and we're going to be able to talk about them today. I'm joined today by Evan Urquhart, who's a writer and a journalist, especially writing about transgender issues. And I came across some of his writings on Twitter, and just very grateful to have him join me today to have this discussion. So why don't you, first off, tell me a little bit about who you are and where you come from on these things, and we'll launch into talking about it.
Yeah, so I'm a transgender man. I always like to just be sure that if people are coming, from different levels, they understand what that is. So, I grew up as a girl and I transitioned to be a man. That's what a transgender man is. And I have been, writing about transgender issues for, I think, 5 or 6 years now. And I have also, been a foster parent of queer and trans youth. And it's really, really concerning what's happening in Texas, but what's happening in Texas is happening in a lot of states. And so, the governor of Texas has directed the state child welfare agencies to treating trans youth as their preferred gender, as the gender they identify as child abuse. And they're particularly focused on certain medical interventions such as puberty blockers or surgeries, which don't even happen to youth, but in the minds of of very anti-trans people, they think we're cutting off penises and and stuff all over the place.
There's a lot of like a trans panic, I guess you could say, right? That people will bolster and fuel this fire of like, oh, look at what they want to do to your kids, as far as like how that goes. And anytime I try to put it in that framework of, being told that medically treating your child could have your child result in your child being taken away from you. I mean, that was the most horrifying part of it. As you put it, though, I read this. So the first time I read this, this is a directive and a direction against puberty blockers was my first thought. But as I've been reading about it, it looks like it's pretty open-ended as far as, like you just said, treating your child as the gender that they have informed you that they are, as their identified gender. That is a parent doing that could even, that's a pretty broad umbrella to say treating them as their identified gender. What does that mean? There's not a restriction on that. If that's to be interpreted as child abuse, that is shocking to me.
Yeah, and there's no legal framework, which they are trying to put in place a legal framework to actually make some of these specific treatments illegal. But one of the most frightening things about this directive from the governor is that it's very open-ended, that any child who goes to school presenting as a different gender than the teachers think that they should be, could be, and not even could be, because the mandatory reporting framework says that the teachers have to report that family and that child to be investigated for child abuse. And
Right. There's not a leeway given when there's something that's classified as neglect or abuse, a mandatory reporter. And I live in a state where technically, people don't realize this, technically in many states, everyone is a mandatory reporter. You got, I mean, teachers and therapists and doctors, they have a special, in many states, it's not even a heightened responsibility as much as it is a heightened training. Because if you don't report child abuse in the state where I live, it isn't often charged, but it can be a misdemeanor against any citizen if they fail to report child abuse. And so you're putting people in a real hot seat.
yeah, I mean, these are laws that are designed to stop adults from turning a blind eye when they see child abuse, because people often don't want to get involved. So there's a reason for these mandatory reporter laws, but when the state is using them to target a, minority group, it's, I mean, Orwellian. I mean, you don't even, you kind of can't stop using hyperbole for this, because people are already in Texas going into families' homes and, and starting to investigate them for, the crime apparently of, of bringing them to a doctor to have evidence-based treatments if those are appropriate for that child.
And that's what people don't understand is I've worked with lots of families where oftentimes the very first level intervention, if you want to call it that, is simply conversational at first, where it's like, okay, tell us more. How do you feel? Before you ever get in a doctor's door, there's a lot of healthy conversation. And oftentimes, people have a weird, I'm going to call it weird. I'm going to say weird sticking point. I think it's unhealthy. I'm just going to, everybody who knows me knows that one of the simplest things you can do for your child who comes and tells you that they have a different gender experience than you thought they had is listen. The easiest thing you can do is just sit and shut up and listen at first. And don't tell them what their gender is. Just listen. And then when they say, here's some pronouns and here's my name, if you get to that point, celebrate that and start doing it day one immediately. That's the first thing you do before you do anything else, regardless of any other background issues. That is the biggest way to just tell your child, I love you, and we're going to figure out what to do, even if I don't know what to do. That's the first step. And so even that, I mean, to say that potentially even that could get CPS knocking on my door, like the easiest, most like kind, loving gesture I could do to a transgendered child who informs me of what they're going through. I mean, that's awful. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like you say, what hyperbole can I use to say it's a terrible, horrifying, awful, abusive power?
Yeah, and I mean, I think what people don't always understand about these medical interventions is that at first that they're evidence-based. That people have tried talk therapy, that people have tried getting trans people to be comfortable as, the sex they were assigned at. It's the most obvious thing. It's common sense, and so people think, well, don't you even try? Well, so, medical science and psychiatry has tried to see if that works. And what the evidence showed, and it is a little bit counterintuitive for some folks, is that, once you see that this is something that's consistent, that persists, that's not just a passing idea, or, because kids they try things on, any child that, any boy that, wants to play as a princess one time is not a trans girl,
Right. And that's where I get into, I think the people, and this is where I should be, I have empathy for those who don't have exposure to true experience and true. They read about and they hear stories of like, oh, a little boy wanted to put on a dress. Well, let's, here we go. All of a sudden the trans mafia showed up and, at my door. No, none of that's happening. There is there's medical research that people aren't aware of that's been done here to say that in fact, denial of these medical services is physically dangerous because people die from not affirming their gender. That's the thing people don't get into either, is that this is life-threatening if you can't receive treatment for a major medical condition.
I mean, this is, and I often try and kind of downplay the suicide risk because I think that it gets normalized in our community, and I think it it's really dangerous for people to hear all the time but there are, there are
That's a good
very
point.
serious harms. There are very serious harms short of suicide. I, as a teenager, spent Christmas one year in a mental hospital because I was, so depressed and suicidal. I didn't die. I didn't kill myself, but that was an extremely traumatic and bad event. It really disrupted my, my school year that year. There's a lot of harm that can come to youth who don't kill themselves.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And that's something I actually really I appreciate you saying that, because I probably am doing the other thing where I'm perpetuating, talking about that more, hopefully, from a good place. But still, I actually really appreciate that feedback, and it actually parallels a lot of my general experience working with people. I think depressive and even suicidal ideation. You're absolutely right. Quality of life is much higher of a risk for untreated things that we need help with, because most people who feel suicidal don't actually follow through, or else we'd have a lot less people on the earth, just in general. But yeah, the quality of life lost and the time lost is also something. When I've talked to people, that's a much more frequent occurrence of risk. So thank you for pointing that out to me. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think people, it is certainly true that trans people are a much higher risk for suicide. Very sadly true. But, if you're a parent and you think about, your child, it's not just that they might kill themselves, it's that they might spend years of their life not knowing what's wrong with them, or why they can't get it together, why they can't hold a job. That this is gender dysphoria is a sort of psychic wound that kind of, like, it's miraculous. There are treatments for it.
Yeah.
But if it's untreated, it's really bad. It's really rough on trans people.
Well, and that's a great point you bring up, is that people try to use like a talk therapy or psychotherapy. While psychotherapy can be a part of a support to this process, it is not the primary thing. It's not like, oh, let's go get some therapy, and then over here on the other side are all these other treatments if we decide, if we really blah, blah, blah. It's actually, no, it's the opposite of that. There's a psychotherapeutic piece that can be present, but maybe can you talk a little more for people about why that doesn't work, the talk therapy approach to say, let's just work through this, and I can take you once, a week for an hour and sit down, talk to your therapist, and everything's fine, kid.
I mean, talk therapy is amazing for helping trans people to figure out like what they want to do and like what the best route forward is. And it's amazing for helping people deal with the real stigma and discrimination that they face. It's amazing for helping families kind of work together and come together around supporting a child. But what it doesn't do is make someone who fundamentally doesn't feel comfortable in their own body, it doesn't take that feeling away. And I know that personally, because I had a pretty severe eating disorder when I was a teenager and young adult. And so I went to a lot of therapy that was very much, geared around trying to get me to feel comfortable in my body and to accept my body. And I like to say that I was the only girl in the eating disorder treatment place that refused yoga, because I was so horrified by this like feeling in your body feeling that I just was like, I can't do this. And, so what I did instead was kind of dissociate and divorce myself from my body so that I could kind of heal from that eating disorder and get on with my life. But I can tell you, therapy to get you to accept your body when you have gender dysphoria, at best is not going to help, and at worst is going to make things worse.
Oh, I think, yeah, definitely. I've seen that where it definitely makes things worse because it pathologizes a condition that, time after time in research study after research study, the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, has done research and released statements and things that have just basically said you're trying to pathologize a part of the problem that isn't the problem. In other words, it's like, like you had said, accept that your body is how it is and shut up. I mean, that's not, the official stance, but the people don't say that out loud, but that's essentially what's being told to a lot of trans youth, right?
And I mean, the fact of the matter is it doesn't work. And,
No.
it would in many ways be easier if it did. But I think sometimes what people don't understand about this is one of my hobby horses. What people don't
Sure.
understand about psychology, about therapy, is that it's not about taking someone with like bad ideas and making them have good ideas. It's not about, you know, taking someone who hears voices and, convincing them that the voices aren't real. It's not about, taking someone who has an eating disorder and make them not want to be thin. I mean, every woman and many men in our country wants to be thin. It's about what is hurting this person, what is
Mhm.
interfering with their quality of life. And if you can get them to a point where, their quality of life is good, they're feeling better about themselves, they're, effective in the world. Psychology is very neutral about what their beliefs are, or what, what their preferences are, or that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And so I think that's like it's like a basic disconnect that people have with like, what's the purpose of this?
Yeah.
It, what works to get someone doing better and having a better life, not changing them to like fit some kind of mainstream.
I remember when I was younger, like literally younger, and also professionally younger. That's how time works. Just for everyone out there, I don't want to show off, but I've got a pretty good handle on how time works. I remember going to a clinical supervisor when I was training in therapy, and talking about how I was working in a place where I had a lot of like teens coming in, and a lot of them came in, and the presenting problem was tied to behavioral outbursts of misbehavior and stuff, and one of the things I was running into was I had quite a few parents that would come in and they'd want to sit and talk to me about here's what happened this week and here's what happened, because they're frustrated and they want help and everything. And I would try to field their concerns and try to give them feedback and talk about and all this. And I went to my clinical supervisor and said, this is eating up a lot of. I don't get to talk to the kids as long as I should to help them gain the insights and things from therapy that you'd hope they would. And my boss was like, "Oh." And she said, "Well, what you need to do is teach their parents what therapy's for." And
Yes.
this light bulb, kind of
Yeah.
thing, and not a light bulb because she did it, it wasn't me realizing it. And I was like, oh yeah. And I've always kind of kept that in my head since and said, yes, of course, a parent who's beleaguered and frustrated, they need support, but that's a whole nother session. Do we need to work through your feelings on your kid, or am I trying to help your kid gain insight? And this is what therapy isn't the principal's office, and therapy isn't, why did you do that naughty thing? And I think so. There is that basic misunderstanding we have just at a societal level, and to say, "Oh, well, if I drop my kid off, they'll be fine," right? And sometimes well intentioned. Once again, there are those people who just have no experience, and their 13, 14-year-old kid doesn't have it either. Although nowadays, a lot of young people learn a lot about this, and one of the dynamics I see is that as young people will do research and look into their own medical situation, if their parents are resistant, their parents are getting maybe feedback from other sources, it comes to this contention of, well, you're just being influenced by a bunch of yahoos online that are telling you to be a girl or be a guy, and it's a trend, it's a fad, you're going to change your mind in 10 minutes. Um, when you see things like that, what kind of responses do you have to that with your experience and knowledge?
So I think that people I see this especially when people are talking about young trans boys who are often sort of referred to in the media as girls or as people's daughters. People have a sort of they're sexist. We all grow up with this kind of sexist society and these stereotypes, and one of the stereotypes that people go to really quickly is that that girls are very kind of silly, that they kind of are easily led astray by peers, and they really need to be protected from themselves and kind of steered on the right path. So when that intersects with transgender boys, there's kind of a natural sort of gut feeling that people say it feels right, that they're just going online, they're hearing all of this stuff, and they're just being influenced by it. And if we just like take them away from the internet and tell them that they're definitely a girl and they're going to be a woman,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to fix everything. And it doesn't work that way. So I mean, I think what I want parents to understand is kind of a couple of things. One is that your transgender son is not going to just stop being transgender. And the other, which is a little bit nuanced, is that your daughter, if she, uh, wears men's clothes for a few weeks or tries out a different pronoun or a nickname, is also not going to become transgender for that.
That's
like
right.
Certainly kids influence each other. I'm not trying to tell anyone that they don't, but going through a goth phase is not a fundamental danger to your child's identity. Like it'll be fine. That
Yeah.
that that
I know that, and of course, the research bears out that once there has been a consistent experience of gender dysphoria and identification with an identified gender, people don't tend to change that. They don't tend to go once that's been, something that has been observable and has been there for a present. Statistically speaking, people don't tend to go back on
they
that.
don't, and I believe the research is also that adolescents are much less likely to, they call it desist, to to stop feeling that way than much younger children. And I mean, this is somewhat older research, so there certainly could be new results that come out, but that actually that trans men are less likely to desist. And I think that a lot of that is about that there is a very weird, very sick way that that our society treats boys who are feminine. And so so boys who are feminine have it really rough, and so I think that there is more of a likelihood of them getting a lot of violence, a lot of pushback, and sort of being forced to kind of repress something that that might come naturally to them, whether it's being transgender or just being gender nonconforming or gay.
Yeah, and there's that weird, once again, that the gay panic leaks into it. I grew up in the '80s and '90s, and I remember watching things on sitcoms or movies. I mean, Crocodile Dundee has the most famous egregious scene, but you put that out there that there was this perpetuated comedic thing of we didn't call it back then. They certainly in the movies didn't call it a trans woman, but it was a woman who's really, I'm doing air quotes like crazy here around the microphone. People can't, if you're listening, really a girl, really a guy, or whatever, and picks up a guy in a bar, and it's like, and seeing that as a comic trope, and then never thinking about it, never questioning it until one day one person said, "Yeah, that would never happen. That'd be dangerous." And I thought, oh, of course not. That was like it took no time at all to hear that and think about it and go, well, that's stupid. That would never. That's incredibly dangerous. No one would do that. And so, but yet this is perpetuated in a very subtle way of like, oh, this is a threat somehow to your masculinity, that there's people out there or whatever. And it's just a very insidious kind of messaging. And I think that leaks into the way people are treating. Obviously, the kids that are going through gender dysphoria and who are transgender nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the '90s, and being transgender was a joke, and it wasn't something that you could be. It wasn't something that you could imagine for yourself, and if you did, it was just the worst thing that you could imagine. And it's you just really want for the next generation not to have to go through that. And there are very, very committed people who want to keep it that way, to keep young people from recognizing themselves in media, from knowing who they are. I mean, they would much rather have trans people be incarcerated, to be in mental institutions, to be struggling and not able to get a job, than to have trans people be out and thriving and healthy. It's not, it's a fundamental clash of values in many ways, where it's preferable for them that trans people not be able to thrive and able to be healthy and out there.
And it's one of the real effects and even definition of privilege, isn't it? If it's like, oh, well, I don't want to have to worry about this because, I don't want to have to think about it. And well, you can opt out of thinking about it if you never have to deal with it yourself. But what kind of compassion is that? That's just not a way to live our lives, without empathy or anything. But and it's interesting as you say that experience too. And I've had an anecdotal type experience, even just when I think about, you compared a minute ago to the fear of it being a fad, like a goth phase or something. And, as I look at all the people that I've worked with over the years, I would say, there's been quite a few transgendered individuals that I've worked with. And I would say young adolescent people who have said, I think I might be trans, and then later said, no, I don't think I am. Two, I would say, come to mind. I don't think it's more than that. And the experience they both had in common, very supportive parents who just said, yeah, you tell us who you are because you would know, right? And so just supported, and then they were able to experiment with actually thinking about and discovering themselves, and it was a great experience, right? So there's no wrong way to support except not to support. I guess there's no reason, in the long run, there's there's not a healthy reason not to support. From my experience, there's no healthy reason not to support your kid.
Yeah, I mean, I wish people could see the transformation that can take place. So this is as a foster parent. I've worked with kids who have very serious issues on paper, who are very difficult to place into foster homes. And, I'm not going to say it was all roses or that was easy, but just seeing the transformation when a kid is being listened to, is being taken seriously, is being in the driver's seat of how they want to present themselves and what they want to be called. And, you have social workers who are just almost shocked that the kid is doing so well, that the kid is going to school every day suddenly, that the kid is, doing fine in school, that the kid has friends, that the kid is happy and smiling. It's like, it wasn't even expected. And it's not that difficult of an intervention. I mean, talk about, we could not get either of the kids to actually go to a doctor. They were very afraid of doctors and having any kind of diagnosis. So we never even got that far. And still,
Yeah.
they were thriving. They were doing so well. We had an 18-year-old who aged out, and my ex-wife is still finally got to a doctor's appointment. One of the kids that we had previously.
And that's it. Kind of gives you that opportunity then to do for what with the insights you have. I'm sure you're able to do for them what you didn't always have done for you.
Yeah. I mean, my parents. I really believe that if gender dysphoria diagnosis had been on the radar in the 1990s, I think that they would have done their best to support me. I think it would have been hard for them, but I think they would have done their best. But it just wasn't on the radar, and parents right now have such an opportunity to be able to support their kids, to be able to say, oh, what's going on with this kid who's kind of so mopey and down on themselves all the time. Maybe it's this. I really encourage parents to recognize the opportunity rather than because it's scary, that your kid might be discriminated against, that they might be going under medical procedures. It's a frightening thing, but there's an opportunity there to have a kid who no one knows what's going wrong with. This might be it. It might actually help.
And imagine, especially for those who grow up with treatment-resistant depression, I mean, if there was an intervention that was so easy as, hey, just start by saying this and then move on to medical. I mean, once again, like you put it, even just saying identified pronouns and using a person's name already starts to do so much. And it's like, boy, here's a few magic words you can say, first of all, and then there's some non-invasive and, very, very low side effect treatments that we can start. How many people would just snap that up if it was like, boy, that will take away a lot of the anxiety and depression symptoms that my kid has? Are you serious? They'd jump at it, right?
Absolutely.
And so
absolutely.
to look at that, to look at the side, it reminds me too, one of the things I have also seen, and I've started to talk to people about a lot, is what you just said, the opportunity to say, if my child comes to me and says, I trust you enough that I want to tell you more about myself, and it's scary, that's a very vulnerable, loving gesture at that moment to say, If I thought that if someone comes to me and says, guess what? I'm your son. I know you thought I was your daughter, but I'm your son, right? Or vice versa. It's like I just had an opportunity to get to know my child and to say, do I want to know my real child, or do I want to know the version of them that I want them to be? And I think as a parent, that's a thing that there's lots of other little and big ways that we impose that on our kids, right? Do I love them for who I want them to be and the things I want them to do, or do I love them for who they are and what they do? Actually, in
Yeah, I mean,
actuality, right?
the challenge of parenting an adolescent is that this is a stage of life when someone is discovering who they are separate from you, and they are branching out and they are making mistakes, and you are cringing usually at their mistakes and how awkward they are. But you actually you have to let them do it. And I think that finding out your child is trans, to a lesser extent finding out your child is gay, is just it's the hard mode of the exact thing everyone else is having to do, which is understand that this is a differentiating person who is figuring out who they are, and that is going to be different from what you expected, and that sometimes you're going to have to deal with a little disappointment or a little confusion or a little frustration over that, and that's normal as a parent. But the way that person is going to turn into an adult who knows who they are is for you to be supportive.
Yeah.
Especially of things that are that are harmless, like like wearing different clothes or using a different name. I mean, there's so much kids can get into that is genuinely harmful.
Oh, exactly. And we get so worried about some of the things that aren't, right? And the other end, I always use this example, and people can, there's a million different examples, and this one obviously doesn't apply to everyone. But I use the example of a wedding dress. Let's say that there's someone who's like, maybe a mother who's like, I really imagined that we'd pick out wedding dresses together, and now that dream is just gone. It's absolutely gone because I don't, and so there's feelings associated with that, because maybe I picked them out with my mother and all my sisters, and we went and had this, and I was thinking what my child and I, we're going to have this experience, and blah blah blah. I shouldn't say blah, blah, blah. That's dismissive, because that's legit. There's a mourning process to any major life change. I think that the difference of where I see it become healthy is when people come to me and they say, without their kid in the room, I'm going through that. That's my problem. I'm going through that. I need to mourn my loss and celebrate my gain and embrace the situation and go, geez, I never will have that experience with them, and I really wanted to, and that's how. And then maybe that does suck for me that I don't get to that. But now, what else is open to me? And as I get to know my son and the excitement of having this son that I didn't know, that he was going through all this, and now I do, and going through that process, it's not that it's not legitimate. And it's not that it isn't hard or painful to experience any change, but I think the danger is that becomes, well, look what you did. You took away my wedding dress experience. And that's an unhealthy way to lash out at our kid. Right. And so I don't know. I just think like there is embracing and mourning a loss that's legitimate for people, but that's their issue. They need to work through that. And it's not always, I mean, sometimes they can talk about it with their kid down the road, but they don't always even have to, because it's as a parent, we all go through that where it's my issue. I wanted my kid to go into this industry. They didn't. I got to go. A lot more people commonly would say it's inappropriate of me to harangue my kid about not picking the right job. I mean, it's like, okay, let it go. More people would just say that. It's not about the kid. It's about you. It's your problem. So focusing and taking responsibility for our own emotions, as cis parents, I guess I should say, is who I'm talking to right now.
Yeah, we've done a lot of kind of talking to cis parents. Let's talk about what people can do and how they can get involved. I always really like to go there. I think for people who are just still concerned, still not sure about this issue, I always say, inform yourself. I think there's a lot of propaganda out there that suggests that trans people don't want you to learn about science, or that trans people don't want you to, do the research. The research supports affirming trans people. And so there's nothing to fear there. You can follow me and send me a DM on Twitter at E_Irk. I will, steer you to some medical research sources if you want to get started. And
That's the
then
letter E_URQ, right?
that is it.
Yeah,
That's
gotcha.
it.
I just wanted to drag that so to put that out with people
I appreciate
should
it.
and you
I
should. They should
appreciate
follow
you
this.
helping plug me. Yeah. And then, I follow this issue. Like, it doesn't have to be your top issue, but put it on your radar if you're not a parent, if you're not directly involved. Um, you know, included in the things that you care about and the things that you might write your congressperson or your, state level representative or whoever about, included in the things that maybe you sometimes donate to, because, trans people are really under assault right now. The Republican Party is obsessed with us. There are Republicans who are blaming the Russian invasion of Ukraine on too much trans acceptance. Like, people, they have brainworms. These people are
Whoa.
crazy,
Wow.
and they are targeting us. And I mean,
Oh my gosh.
we may not, we it may not be go well for us, and we need our allies to be, even if you're not, you don't have to be the primary cheerleader for trans rights. I appreciate that you clearly, take this seriously and really have it on your radar, but just, be willing to, like, check in once in a while, send a check once in a while, send a letter to your congressperson once in a while.
Yeah, it really is something.
Look out for us.
Yeah, it's something that I think that we don't have to, I guess we should accept. And any of us who are, I mean, for me, there's these things about myself, like I'm white, I'm straight, I'm cis. And so I have had to come to a point where I've had to realize I actually do have skin in the game in all of those areas, racial and sexual orientation issues and sexual identity issues. Of course I do, because I'm human and I live in the world, and I'm either helping or hurting, really. If you think about it, my silence speaks volumes if I don't speak up and do anything or say anything, right? And that's become even more so as I've gotten to know people personally and professionally who go through these issues. Obviously, that's more. But we don't need to wait for that. If you don't know anyone, you don't know, do it. Google exists. Learn about something. Do some donations. Follow some journalism. Retweet even. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything to share an article on your social media. Now, socially, is that scary a little? Yeah, but I mean, come on. We can do, we're not, and I hear what you're saying. You're not asking everyone to be like the John Brown abolitionist style of like trans rights or whatever. You're just, but you think about that in terms of someone having to go through all the stuff that they have to go through being transgendered. I can forward an article, right? I can speak up at the Thanksgiving table when somebody says, "Isn't that all just a bunch of bullshit?" And it's like, no, actually, I've looked into it, and it's really actually those, these are human beings and kids that are being hurt, and oh my gosh, it makes me cry when I read that. And maybe you should read some of these things I read. Yeah, Uncle Joe might get his nose out of joint, but I've sent a message to at least a little. It's just a little, try to do a little at least if you can't do more.
Yeah, I mean, if one person hearing the sound of my voice just doesn't laugh at a joke, don't even have to say this is offending me or get on your high horse. Just don't give that polite laughter that someone is going to think is genuine laughter because you don't want to be socially awkward. Just be like, this is not really funny to me.
Just have a minute of social awkwardness. And actually you've done something, isn't that?
Exactly. Like, be willing to have an occasional minute of social awkwardness. I mean, it is hard to be begging people to, undergo that minor an amount of discomfort. But that is kind of where we are here, which is, it is very easy to just politely laugh at the kind of shitty joke about a man in a dress or Caitlyn Jenner or whatever. And all I'm saying is, you don't have to do that. You don't have to reward that kind of shitty behavior with your laughter, with your, just punish it a little bit with holding that kind of social lubrication that makes people feel like everyone agrees with me here.
And I'll say this too, as somebody who has had a lot of different things forwarded to me by people that are like, "Well, what about this?" I have found, and this I think goes for any social justice issue that has like weird political parts, or people who have, whether it's racism or transphobia or homophobia, all those things. Be careful, just as you put it. Those who are pro-equality usually very pro-science. Get out there, Google stuff, look up stuff. But I always like to add, look up things that tend to come from research institutions or doctors or journals. And if you are finding that people who agree with the other side are forwarding one article by one person, see if there's any more that say that. There's one old,
Yeah.
there's an article, there's the one old doctor that was working at, it's one of the major medical institutions that are, I'm not going to give any details about it because it's terrible. It was just a letter where he was like, oh, well, I think people who undergo this one form of treatment for this, they regret it later. That's my finding. And it was him just talking about his own experience. He was like 150 years old. The institution issued a statement saying, look, he didn't even work with those issues when he worked here. We don't really, this guy kind of sucks. Whatever. I'm being a little minimizing here, I guess, but I think that it deserves it. So if, it's like I have a friend online that she posted one day and just said, hey, and this is more on the issues of race. She said, to all my white friends, stop sending me this one person who wrote this one article that agreed with a lot of like really, things that don't agree with anything that other black scholars and black academics and black politicians and black people, if it's 90% of people agree with what I usually do, and you're sending me the one person who you found that I don't really need to read that article over and over again. Could you read any of the dozens of other things that are out there that say the opposite? So, I mean, just make sure, are you actually reading things to read things, or are you looking for the information that exists?
Yeah, there's a lot of anti-trans, there's a movement of anti-trans propaganda. I mean, the Catholic Church in particular is very upset about what they call gender ideology. And so there's this stuff that like is kind of reasonable sounding that can kind of seep in, that people need to be aware of. But if you look at the medical research, ask yourself, why is there a consensus, starting with the American Medical Association and going through all of these other, medical associations, that this is the only kind of treatment for trans people that is evidence-based. Mm-hmm. Like, you really do need to start to get into conspiracy theory territory to not eventually accept the evidence that we are who we say we are. Our treatments are the thing that allows us to live comfortably in the world. And, we're not trying to make your sons into daughters and your daughters into sons. But, if they want to, we're here. It's going to be fine. We live, good, healthy lives as trans people. And, and it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been so informational and helpful. I really appreciate you coming on. It's an ongoing thing and something that I don't feel like is a one-time conversation at all. I encourage people to follow you on Twitter, as you said. You already started to go here. I always like to ask people, especially the first time on the show, if they have any specific charitable or nonprofit organizations that they would direct people towards. You've already gone there, but what would you add to that as far as where do people send that check after they don't laugh at that joke and they tell Uncle Joe to get lost?
I am kind of terrible. I probably should have prepared for this, but I
never tell people. I never give them prep time. I just do it.
Texas is in a really tough spot right now. So I would encourage people to donate to Texas LGBTQ organizations. I know the Trevor Project does good work, and the ACLU is really standing up for trans people in the courts. So I would definitely encourage people to, support them in the work that they're doing.
And I want to always get people in the conversation too. As always, you can tweet at me here for the show at Breakabrain on Twitter. You can tweet at Evan at E_URQ or Urk. And definitely become part of this conversation. I want to hear from people. You can also always email me, dwighthurst@gmail.com, to let me know some of your thoughts and what you would like to see us address. I also would really love to hear from any listeners out there who have experiences of their own in this area of dealing with the issues that touch the trans community and their own feelings. Please reach out. I'd love to do more on this topic at any time, obviously. So Evan, thank you.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Thank you for listening to the Courtemp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Courtemp Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.